90% of startups that raise millions of dollars still end up dead in the entrepreneurial graveyard. For months, I believed the conventional wisdom about why this happens. Startups fail because they run out of money, right? Build a great product, raise funding, execute well, and you'll succeed. Then I started digging into the actual data behind these failures. Not the sanitized case studies you read in business schools, but the real post-mortems from founders who watched their companies die despite doing everything right. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about startup failure. Because the companies that should have succeeded, the ones with millions in funding, experienced teams, and validated products, were dying at the exact same rate as everyone else. In fact, 75% of venture-backed startups still fail, even with all that money in the bank. That makes no sense, unless we've been looking at this problem completely wrong. So I went deeper. I analyzed over 400 startup post-mortems, from billion-dollar unicorns to bootstrap side projects, looking for the real patterns behind these failures. And I discovered that few specific factors determine whether you live or die in the startup world. Factors that have nothing to do with your product, your team, or how much money you've raised. So to find these patterns, our story starts with a company that raised $104 million, claimed to have a revolutionary AI technology, and lied about it for years. If you ask any investor why startups fail, they'll give you the standard list. No market need, ran out of cash, wrong team, got out-competed, the same good old story for decades. On the surface, the numbers seem to support this. CB Insights data shows that 42% of startups fail because of no market need, 29% because they ran out of cash, 23% due to the team issues. Okay, fine. And now what? The first thing that hit me when I started digging deeper into these failures is that I realized we've been always looking at symptoms, not causes. Like saying people die because their heart stops beating. Technically true, obviously, but what caused the heart to stop? Harder to say, but definitely more important. ScaleFactor perfectly illustrates this problem. They raised $104 million to automate bookkeeping with AI. The founders were sharp, the market was huge, they had plenty of cash in the bank. So why did they shut down? The official story was poor product market fit. When you dig deeper, you discover something different. They didn't actually have the AI they claimed to have. Instead, they were secretly using human workers in India to do the bookkeeping manually for years, while raising over $100 million. Hear me out. The ScaleFactor founders weren't criminal masterminds. They started with genuine intentions to build AI-powered bookkeeping software. They created sophisticated machine learning algorithms, impressive demos, and a compelling vision for the future of accounting. But the problem was that their AI couldn't handle the complexity of real-world bookkeeping. Different businesses have different accounting standards, unexpected transactions, and nuanced financial situations that require human judgment. Their algorithms worked fine in controlled demos with clean data, but broke down when faced with the messy reality of actual small business finances. So they made a decision that, from their point of view, seemed reasonable at the time. They'd supplement the AI with human workers, just temporarily, while they improved the technology. They hired accountants in India to handle the cases their AI couldn't process. They told themselves this was just a bridge solution while they perfected their algorithms. Month after month, the percentage of work done by humans increased while the AI contribution decreased. They kept raising money based on the promise that they were close to full automation. They kept telling investors that 80% of the work was automated, then 70%, then 60%. In reality, by the end, human workers were doing almost everything. And by that time, ScaleFactor continued to lie to investors, and worse, they were lying to themselves. They sincerely thought that they were on the verge of a breakthrough that would make their AI viable. This is what I call structural dishonesty. Companies that build their entire business model around a fundamental assumption that isn't true, then spend years and millions of dollars trying to make that false assumption work instead of facing reality. You might think that this is just another fraud case, like Theranos. I found this exact same pattern repeated across hundreds of failures. Startups that looked successful on paper, had raised significant funding, were built on fundamental deceptions. Have you heard of 7 Dreamers Laboratories? They raised over $50 million to build a robot that could wash, iron, and fold laundry. Sounds amazing, right? The problem was that their robot was so expensive and so slow that it couldn't compete with just doing laundry normally. The Seven Dreamers robot took 10 minutes to fold a single t-shirt. A human can fold the same shirt in 10 seconds. The machine cost tens of thousands of dollars and required constant maintenance. It could only handle simple clothing items, nothing with buttons, zippers, or complex shapes. The founders were truly convinced in their vision of automated laundry. They weren't trying to deceive anyone. They were trapped in a cycle of structural dishonesty was built on a false premise. And I know it can sound ridiculous, but look at Jawbone. They reach a $3 billion valuation with their fitness trackers. Customers constantly complained about the product issues, poor customer service, and devices that simply didn't work as promised. The bands would break after a few weeks. The apps would crash constantly. The heart rate monitors gave wildly inaccurate readings. Instead of fixing these problems, Jawbone spent their resources on legal battles against competitors like Fitbit. They filed patent lawsuits, hired expensive lawyers, and focused on protecting their intellectual property rather than building products that actually worked. But you miss the whole thing if you think that Jawbone founders were stupid. They knew their products had serious quality issues. They told themselves these were temporary growing pains that would be solved in the next version. They convinced themselves that their superior design and brand would overcome the technical problems. They believed that fighting Fitbit in court was more important than fighting for customer satisfaction. All these decisions seem obvious mistakes from our perspective now, but think about what we might have believed if we were in their position. Each of these companies shared the same fatal pattern. They built their business around a core assumption that wasn't true, then spent years and millions of dollars trying to make that assumption work instead of questioning whether it was fundamentally flawed. ScaleFactor assumed AI could replace human accountants for complex small business bookkeeping. Seven Dreamers assumed robotic laundry folding could be faster and cheaper than humans. Jawbone assumed their brand and design could overcome systematic product quality problems. None of these assumptions were necessarily wrong in theory. Maybe AI will eventually replace accountants. Maybe robots will eventually fold laundry efficiently. And maybe design can overcome technical problems. The issue was timing and honesty. These companies were trying to build businesses around technologies that weren't ready yet, market dynamics that didn't exist yet, customer behaviors that hadn't developed yet. Instead of acknowledging this reality and adjusting their approach, they doubled down on their original assumptions. They raised more money to solve problems that couldn't be solved with money, and they hired more engineers to fix issues that weren't engineering problems. They spent more on marketing to overcome product market fit problems that couldn't be marketed away. The most dangerous part of structural dishonesty is that it's invisible to the people trapped inside it. The founders believe their own stories. The investors believe the progress reports. The employees believe they were working on breakthrough technologies. Everyone was operating in good faith. They were all operating based on assumptions that weren't true. The entire ecosystem had agreed to believe in a version of reality that didn't actually exist. Now, you might think I'd found the answer. Structural dishonesty explains ScaleFactor, Seven Dreamers, and Jawbone. Problem solved, right? Not quite. Because when I kept digging, I stumbled across something that didn't fit this pattern at all. Companies that were completely honest about their technology, teams that genuinely had working products, founders who weren't lying to anyone, and important point, including themselves. But they still failed. This is Juicero. Yes, a 699 Wi-Fi connected juicing machine that you could squeeze by hand. Everyone laughed at how stupid the idea was. The tech press had a field day mocking Silicon Valley excess. But still, Juicero wasn't lying about their technology. Their machine actually worked, exactly as advertised. It was a beautifully designed Wi-Fi connected device that could scan QR codes on juice packs and extract fresh juice. They had real customers buying their products. They had distribution deals with major retailers. They had passionate early adopters who loved the convenience. So why did they become a punchline while just 3 years later, companies selling $2,000 connected exercise bikes became billion-dollar success stories? The answer changed everything I thought I knew about startup failure. I found this insight buried in a TED Talk by Bill Gross, the founder of Idea Lab. Bill had done something I wish I'd thought of first. He analyzed 200 startups across 5 factors: the idea, the team, the business model, funding, and timing. Everyone expected the idea or team to matter most. These are the factors that get all the attention in business schools, pitch competitions, and investor meetings. But actually, timing ranked as the #1 factor determining success or failure. The same idea with the same team, same business model, same funding could succeed or fail based purely on whether it was too early or too late to the market. Think about that for a second. All the things we obsess over, the brilliance of the idea, the quality of the team, the sophistication of the technology, matter less than whether you're building at the right moment in history. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Juicero launched in 2017 when people were going to juice bars and cafes regularly. Their convenience product was trying to solve a problem that most people didn't actually have. Why would you spend $699 on a machine to make juice at home when you could just swing by your local juice bar on the way to work? Fast forward 3 years, COVID lockdowns hit. Suddenly, people were stuck at home. Going to juice bars wasn't an option anymore. And during the exact same period, companies like Peloton and Mirror were selling expensive home fitness equipment for thousands of dollars, and people were fighting to buy them. The whole difference is the timing. When people are trapped at home, expensive equipment that replaces outside services suddenly makes perfect sense. Peloton wasn't smarter than Juicero. They weren't better at marketing or product development. They just happened to scale their business right when the world changed in a way that made their product essential instead of ridiculous. But the most famous example that perfectly illustrates this pattern is Vine. Vine launched in 2012 and was actually acquired by Twitter before it even launched publicly. It was the first major platform built specifically for short-form video content. Users absolutely loved it. Creators built massive followings. It had 200 million users at its peak. The engagement numbers were incredible. But 5 years later, Twitter just killed it. Why? Because Twitter couldn't figure out how to monetize it effectively. They saw 6-second videos as a novelty, a distraction from their main platform. The ad formats didn't exist yet. Brands didn't know how to create content for the platform. The entire monetization infrastructure for short-form video just wasn't there. Fast forward to 2018. TikTok launches in the US with the exact same concept. Short-form video content. Today, TikTok is worth over $100 billion and has completely revolutionized social media. They're generating billions in ad revenue using formats that didn't exist when Vine was around. Vine had a brilliant idea. They had working technology. They had an engaged user base. They were just 3 to 4 years too early. The market wasn't ready for short-form video as a dominant medium. By the time TikTok launched, all the pieces were in place. Mobile video quality had improved, internet speeds were faster, advertisers understood social media marketing. The influencer economy had matured. TikTok walked into a market that Vine had helped create but couldn't survive to benefit from. Vine creators must be crying right now, but I can tell you that when I analyzed this pattern across my dataset, I realized they're not alone. 68% of the startups I studied actually had the right idea. They weren't building products that nobody wanted. They were just building products people would want, but at the wrong time. Think about all the video conferencing startups that died before Zoom dominated during COVID, or the food delivering companies that shut down before Uber became essential during lockdowns. These weren't bad ideas executed poorly. They were good ideas executed too early. The most dangerous thing for a startup isn't being too early to market, it's being slightly too early. Companies that are way too early usually realize it quickly. They get zero traction, no customers, no interest from anyone. They fail fast and fail cheap. They either pivot immediately or shut down before burning through too much money. Meanwhile, companies that launch just a few years later find the same boulder rolling downhill. The market timing is right, so every dollar they spend on marketing works better. Every feature they build gets more engagement, and every hire they make contributes to momentum rather than just trying to create it. This timing trap explains something that confused me for a while. Why having more funding actually makes startups more likely to fail. It seems counterintuitive, right? I mean, more money should mean better survival rates, more runway, more time to figure things out, more resources to solve problems. But I found data that suggests otherwise. 75% failure rate of venture-backed startups versus 82% for bootstrapped companies. And when you understand this timing trap, it makes perfect sense. That seems like good news for funded startups, right? A 7% survival rate should mean money helps. Wrong. When you dig into the timeline, funded startups take significantly longer to fail. They burn through millions more dollars. They hurt more people. They create more collateral damage. Most importantly, they ignore reality for much longer because they can afford to. The money doesn't solve the fundamental problems. It amplifies them. Let me tell you about a company that perfectly illustrates this pattern. Better Place. Better Place raised $675 million to build battery swapping stations for electric vehicles. The idea was kind of brilliant. Instead of waiting hours to charge your electric car, you'd pull into a station and swap your depleted battery for a fresh one in minutes. Like filling up with gas, but for electric vehicles. Well, it seems kind of obvious now, but just think about what this truly means to invent. The founder, Shay Agassi, was a visionary who'd been successful before. The team was world-class, packed with automotive and technology experts. The technology actually worked. They demonstrated functioning battery swap stations that could change a car battery in under 5 minutes. They succeed in creating partnerships with major automakers like Renault and support from governments in Israel and Denmark. By every traditional metric that investors and business schools teach you to evaluate, Better Place should have succeeded. But they made one fatal mistake that their massive funding just enabled. They tried to build the entire infrastructure before providing demand. They needed thousands of battery swapping stations and thousands of compatible cars and thousands of customers all at the same time. It was a classic chicken and egg problem, but scaled to require almost $1 billion to solve. You can't sell cars without charging infrastructure. You can't build profitable charging infrastructure without cars on the road. And you can't get customers without both cars and infrastructure. With unlimited funding, they might have actually pulled it off. $675 million wasn't enough, because what I've not told you is that they launched in 2007. So when they ran out of money in 2013, the entire network became worthless overnight. All those battery swapping stations became instantly useless without the cars. So you have to realize if Better Place had been forced to bootstrap, they would have started completely differently. Maybe one city, maybe one type of vehicle, maybe even just a pilot program with a taxi company. They would have been forced to prove the model worked on a small scale before attempting to revolutionize transportation globally. Instead, the massive funding created what I call solution-first thinking. They fell in love with their grand vision and lost sight of whether anyone actually wanted it. Their money permitted them to build first and ask questions later. This pattern isn't limited to hardware companies with complex infrastructure needs. Look at what looks like the great electric scooter massacre of 2020. Bird, Lime, Spin, Skip, Scoot. Dozens of companies raised billions of dollars collectively in just a few years. They all followed the exact same venture capital funded playbook. Flood cities with scooters, raise massive rounds, scale fast, break things, ask for forgiveness later. With big investment, they first ignored fundamental problems that should have killed these businesses immediately. Cities didn't want thousands of scooters cluttering their sidewalks. The unit economics were terrible. Scooters were being stolen, vandalized, and thrown in rivers. Insurance costs were astronomical due to accidents and injuries. The funding kept coming, so they kept scaling these problems. More cities, more scooters, more problems. They were essentially burning investor money to make their fundamental issues bigger and more expensive to solve. If these companies had been bootstrapped, they would have been forced to solve the vandalism problem, the city permit problem, the unit economics problem, and before expanding to new markets, they would have had to make their business model work in one city before attempting to conquer dozens. This shows you the most counterintuitive pattern in my entire analysis. Money doesn't fail startups. Money reveals what would have failed anyway, but just makes the failure more expensive and more devastating. The real killer isn't running out of cash, it's having too much cash too early. Each of these companies had the same experience. Money allowed them to ignore fundamental problems, scale prematurely, and build complex solutions before validating simple ones. But when I looked at the timeline of these failures, I noticed something else disturbing. The funded companies didn't just fail more expensively, they failed more slowly. They burned through their problems for years, convincing themselves and their investors that they were always just one breakthrough away from success. Bootstrap companies fail fast. When they run out of their own money, reality hits immediately. They either figure out how to make money or they shut down. It's brutal but efficient. Funded companies can afford to ignore reality until their next board meeting, then their next funding round, then their next quarterly review. They optimize for raising the next round instead of building sustainable businesses. When I analyzed the companies that survived these patterns, I found they all shared one specific characteristic that was nothing to do with their idea, their team, or their funding. The companies that survived all had founders who stayed obsessively close to their customers. Not in a marketing sense, not in a customer development sense, in a visceral, day-to-day, can't sleep at night sense. They use their own products daily. They talk to customers weekly. They felt physical pain when customers churned. This created a sort of immune system against the delusions that kill most startups. When you're truly connected to your customers, you can't lie to yourself about product market fit. You can't ignore the signs that you're too early to market. And you can't pretend that your growth metrics are meaningful when you know your customers aren't actually engaged. Zoom perfectly illustrates this. Eric Yuan, the founder, used Zoom every single day for years before COVID made them a household name. He talked to customers constantly. When customers complained about connectivity issues, he felt it personally. This obsessive customer focus meant that when COVID hit and video conferencing demand exploded, Zoom was ready. Their infrastructure could handle the load. Their products actually worked reliably. They were built for real customer needs, not theoretical market opportunities. Compare that to the failures I studied. ScaleFactor's founders weren't doing their own bookkeeping with their AI. If they had been, they would have realized immediately that the AI didn't work. Juicero's founders weren't drinking $8 juice packs every morning. Better Place's founders weren't driving electric cars daily and feeling the pain of charging infrastructure. They were all building based on market research and investor feedback, not customer pain. Customer obsession also protects you from the timing trap. When you're really close to your customers, you can feel when the market isn't ready yet. You can sense when you're pushing against resistance instead of riding a wave. The more money you raise, the easier it becomes to lose this customer connection. Investors want growth metrics. Employees want clearer roadmaps. Media wants big vision stories. All of these forces pull you away from individual customer conversations and toward aggregate data and theories. Consider Sidecar, one of the first rideshare companies. They developed better technology than Uber in many ways. Their founder later wrote, "We out-innovated Uber, but still failed to win the market." They lost because they weren't as close to understanding what the customers actually wanted: availability and convenience, not necessarily the most elegant technical solution. So here's your action plan to build something serious on this analysis. First, use your own product every single day. If you can't, you'll struggle to understand your product market fit. Talk to your customers every week. And I don't mean surveys or analytics, actual conversations where you can hear the emotion in their voice. Track one metric that directly measures customer desperation. How much would they pay to not lose your product? If the answer is 0, you don't have product market fit yet. Resist the temptation to scale before you're absolutely certain about product market fit. The money will always be there if you have real traction. If you scale prematurely, money will just amplify your problems. And finally, raise money like your life depends on proving you don't need it. The best funding comes when you have leverage and clear evidence of success, not when you're desperate. In other words, if you trust in a project, in a product, at the end, it is to give it to someone else for a few dollars. So make sure this person would love to have it. I know this isn't inspiring startup advice you usually hear. There's no quick hack or secret formula here. Building a successful startup is brutally hard, and 90% will still fail. But now you know why most of them really fail. More importantly, you know how to avoid the patterns that kill the other 90%. So I have one last question for you. What are you going to do with this?